Hey y'all, this is Joseph. Welcome to our 3D Sorcerer YouTube channel. Today we're going to be continuing our design of the GoPro tool. This is a little product that GoPro makes to tighten these thumb screws that you use on the different mounts for GoPros. And our current version of this product is this. We did this in the last episode. This wrench component, which is the most important part, is still not fitting perfectly. And I think that has to do with the different sizes inside of the hex here. So I might reduce it a pretty drastic amount just so that it'll fit rather easily. And then I also thought that we could try to add a micro SD card slot to this. Something that everyone hates to do is to forget their micro SD card for their GoPro. So it'd be nice to be able to keep one handy, inside of this somehow. So that's another thing I'm looking at, and I think that we can get it done. So thanks for watching, hope y'all enjoy it. Alright, so here's our most recent design. Some of the things we wanted to modify were making this a little bit offset and then changing the radius here a little bit just to make it slightly more aesthetically pleasing. So I'm going to go into the sketch here. And I think it actually might be easier just to delete this circle component. I thought it was a good idea originally, and it still would work, but I think just overall it would be a little bit easier just to go ahead and make these rectangles, and then we can always just fill it however we see fit to make it a hook shape. So these are just going to be the walls. So I decided to fast forward through some of these adjustments. Felt like that would be less boring for you all, but essentially I'm just adjusting the sketch to make it rectangular, and then we can add fillets at the end to make the hook shape. One way we could kind of make it aesthetically pleasing is to keep this line in line with where this is, so that might be something we could consider. So here I'm adjusting the dimensions and making those sketches in line with one another, and then I had to go back and re-extrude some portions of the design after adjusting the sketches, and now I'm going to add the fillets here to make the hook shape for the bottle opener. I do worry a little bit about this being too much of an overhang though, because then if you can't get this into the bottle access, you can't really use it. So I think I might actually align this and this. So this is where I just changed the alignment again. So now I like that a little bit better. Here I made the hook a little bit narrower. Okay, so that looks better to me. So this is in line obviously, but we can still add fillet here. I want it to have a little bit of girth, because if we did the original 3 that I had, this is probably going to shear off because it's 3D printed. So trying to kind of keep that in mind just in general. So now after looking at this, I really want this to actually be square. I think it doesn't quite look right to me like this. It's probably fine, but I just like the square look a little bit better. So to make this square, I'm actually going to move this to the center like we had it before. So this is where I adjust the size and shape of the keychain cutout. I make it into a square because I feel like that's going to be more aesthetically pleasing. Then after I extrude it, I feel like the square is a little bit too large, so I reduce the size of the square and then adjust the size of the bottle opener as well to accommodate the smaller square. Add some fillets here and see that that doesn't quite look right, so I make another adjustment to where the back of the square is in line with the back of the bottle opener. And then after finally settling on a design that I'm happy with, I later discovered that this does not actually function as a bottle opener, so later on in the video I'll make some further adjustments to this design. Alright, so I ended up making some adjustments. Found that making this around 5 again and then having these both 3.5 seemed to look the best to me. Obviously I need to test this out and see if it works, but I think that that'll give it enough girth to be pretty rigid there, but also have a little bit of a bite here. And I made this a different radius than the other parts, just so that it could kind of fit under the cap a little bit easier. So I think that overall I'm pretty happy with how this looks. As far as the SD card cutout, what I was thinking I could do is a slot type thing. So here I had a sketch using the slot command, and I used the slot command because I can match the back radius of the existing design to make it aesthetically pleasing. Then I extrude just far enough not to interfere with the wrench on the front of the design. Okay, so this is going to be our SD card slot here on the back. Just trying to think about a way to basically slide that in. So what I thought was we could make some rails here that should work okay. So I'm just going to make that on the top and bottom. So here I'm adding the two rectangular profiles for the rails so that the SD card component can just slide on. What I'm going to do now is basically make a little taper where it can hold it in place. So hopefully that makes sense. Here I'm just repeating that same sketch for the other three overhangs. So now you can kind of imagine sliding that on. This is just the profile of a standard micro SD card. You can see here it's about 16 millimeters wide and roughly 12 millimeters in height. And the thickness is almost exactly 1 millimeter. So now we need to consider where we want to put the cutout for the SD card, and since this thickness is actually only 1 millimeter, it'd probably be a good idea to put the SD card actually in this other piece we haven't made yet. And another thing to consider is that the width of the SD card is about 16 millimeters, and if we come here and sketch out what 16 millimeters looks like, we actually don't even have enough space if we look at these overhangs. So one way to increase the space is to move these out to the edge more, but we can also just eliminate this overhang. We really only need the outside overhang to keep it on. So I'm going to actually do both. I'm going to move this out a little bit and also delete this internal overhang. So I'm just going to undo that sketch and then go back into actually my original sketch here. I think I can move it out a little bit. Let's go with 3. Let's do 2.5. That should be fine. Make this 2.5 as well. And then when we do this extrusion here for the overhang, I'm actually going to undo these inside ones actually. Okay, so now we have enough space to put that in the middle here, and I'm actually pretty much done with this piece for the most part. So now I'm going to create a new component. I didn't really do this correctly. I should have been working under wrenched all the time, but I wasn't, but it'll be okay for now. Let's put SD part. And what we want to do here, there's a couple ways to do this, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make the whole body and then cut everything out. So I'm going to project this. So now to make the actual part, I'm actually going to offset this just a little bit because it's not going to ever sit perfectly flush. So I'm just going to do this like 0.2 millimeters off just to give it a little bit of spacing. Again, make this horizontal vertical, which I like to do. And then we can make this tangent with this outside curve. So now we have this as our sketch that we're going to extrude. Okay, so now you can kind of see the idea. Now we just need to cut out those slots, and then also our spot for the actual SD card. So I'll come back into this one and see if we can do our sketch on those ends here. So here I'm just trying to find the sketch plane. I want to sketch on the end of the rail so that I can add tolerance to the cutout of the rail. The big thing is just to offset this just a little bit, because we want it to fit tight, we don't want to fit too tight. And with 3D printing, you need to have a little bit of tolerance, so we're on tolerance at like 0.1. The 0.1 tolerance wasn't quite enough. So now should be able to cut that out here. I'm actually going to do two directions, so one direction, pretty obvious. Then the other direction, I'm just going to give it like a millimeter so that it can fit all the way in there, and it won't have a little gap at the end. I don't like this overhang there, so we're going to eliminate that real quick. The issue with those two overhangs is that it's basically impossible to 3D print them since they're so small, so I just remove them entirely. So now, should be better overall. And you're not going to see this because this is going to be up against the other piece. So I think that looks relatively decent. Another thing that I wanted to do, obviously, is to make the cutout in here. And this just needs to be relatively centered, I think would be fine. So, the way I like to center stuff is just to draw a rectangle across here. Now I can make this collinear. Okay, so now we have an easy rectangle, and then you can draw one diagonal across. Make that into a construction line. And so now we have a midpoint there in the center. Create center point rectangle. It should identify the midpoint here for us. Just changing the construction rectangle back to a regular rectangle. And then we said that this was 12 and this was 16. Okay. So that should hold our SD card. It's going to be about a millimeter, so we're going to say negative 1.1, 1.2, just give it a little slack. Let's make it more colorful. I like the yellow currently. So I think that should work. The only thing that I want to add now is a little, actually two things. One is a notch so that this won't slide off very easily. You know, we only have slides right now, so it can easily slide that way. So I'd like to have something that kind of keeps it in place. So I think for that, add some type of little rectangle just right here on this wrench component. So I'm just making a little tab on the wrench component. It's basically just a little bump so that the other piece doesn't slide off easily. I just make a rectangle and then round off the edges. And then on the other side, I just make a little extrusion, a little cubby essentially for it to sit in and kind of lock it in place was the thought process behind it. So that's the idea, is that this will slide and kind of keep it from moving around. Might have to adjust this, but I think that's a good starting point at least. Alright, so the last thing I want to do is to add some text to this, just to kind of accessorize it. So I'll create a sketch on here and add text. And we're going to call it the tool. Dear comments section, I'm fully aware that this is not how you spell tool. Really don't want to do a lot because it'll get into the SD card, but you can kind of see it there. And then on this side, do something similar. If you made it this far, you must find this at least mildly entertaining, so please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel out. Alright, so now that kind of fills that out a little bit. And I think that's going to do it. We can test it out and see how it works. So I'm going to print this off and see if it fits alright. Actually, one more thing just really quickly would be to add the chamfer, which I mentioned in another video, but just makes it look a little bit better. Alright, so that looks pretty good, I think. So I'm going to print this off and see how it turns out. Alright, so this is the version that we ended with in Fusion last time. It was pretty thin and it actually slid pretty good. We had a little slot there and slid on and off kind of how we wanted it to. But I didn't like how thin this was. You could see through it, and if you use a different color it wouldn't be as bad, but I thought that it'd be better if I just made it about 1 millimeter thicker and got rid of that. So did that, and this was the next version here, and also just took out the hexagon. The hexagon was still causing issues with the thumb screw, so just removed that from this side. And then this was what resulted, and the issue was that since we added some thickness, it made this part stiffer, so it wasn't able to be slid off and on as easy. So didn't think that that was really an acceptable amount of force that needed to be applied. It was basically too hard to get off. So then I made another version, and in this version I reduced the height of that notch that we had to kind of hold everything in place, but this was still really too tight. And then I started thinking, okay, well, the next thing to do would be to increase the actual tolerances on the rails. So instead of having 0.1 tolerance, I changed it to 0.2 tolerance. And then this is what the version after that did. So this was actually pretty good, but this was sliding off almost too easily. And then there's also a little bit of play there, which I didn't really like. So then I actually developed a different version of the sliding mechanism. If you can see there, I used a circle instead of the little ridge that we did originally. And then on this side, I made basically a little mouth for the circle to go into. It'll focus, you can see there at the top where the circle fits. And I thought this was a big improvement overall, but this actually was so tight that I had to break it off. So these are actually broken here. So this was a little bit too tight. So then finally just opened up that mouth a little bit with this version. It's hard to tell, but the mouth on this one is a little bit wider, and it allows it to just slide on and off pretty easily, but it also kind of snaps into place. So I was pretty happy with how this one turned out. And then just to show having the SD card in it, so drop that down in there like that, and then you can slide this across it. Alright, so now it's in there, and you need the SD card, just slide it off here, and there you go. So the thing to know about if you decide to 3D print this, the easiest way to get it off is you need to apply pressure on this end. So what that does is it kind of pries it up so that it's away from that little notch, and then you're able to kind of slide it off. So if you're having trouble getting it off, just be sure you apply pressure down on this end. It kind of seems counterintuitive, but it basically acts as a little bit of a fulcrum so that it raises up and is able to slide off relatively easily. So I just realized that I didn't try this out on a bottle, so I got the final version here and attempted to open a bottle with it, and you can see here that there's a slight issue with it doesn't actually fit around the bottle cap. So I had to go back into CAD and make some final adjustments, and just going to compare the two here. You can see this is the updated design. I adjusted the size of the hook there and took this circle or this hole and offset that so that the perimeter around this was the same thickness. I think that improves the aesthetic of it. Now the radius is here and here and here are all the same. So this is what ended up with, and now can test it out on a bottle. This is a family-friendly beverage, but you can see that we're able to get the bottle off. There we go, the bottle cap off. You can see that really no damage to the tip there, worked pretty well. This is compatible with a keychain. I'll run that really quickly. Here's a video of that. I think overall we ended up with something that's pretty respectable. I think that overall happy with the design. You could actually make this a little bit smaller, and I might shrink it down a little bit and have that version available in the files below. But thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it.